What is going on, everybody? Bauer Brown here. Welcome back to the channel, guys, and welcome to another video. Alrighty, so what I have for you guys today, we're going to be talking a little bit about culling. Alright, that's C-U-L-L-I-N-G. That is culling. I will explain in just a couple of minutes what that means and how we use it when we work on our maps, when we're making our creations. All right, but before I get into that, I want to make a correction from one of my past videos. A couple of videos ago, I did something, I did a video on LOD, and whoa, what is going on with that shadow? Anyhow, I did a video about LODs, and in that video, I think I had remarked that this building right here, this placeable did not have an LOD associated with it, and I was not correct. I was very wrong. I even said so in the video that it didn't make sense why it would not have one. And here I just wasn't drilling down far enough. It's in the visuals transform group. And if you keep right here, you can see the LOD0 and LOD1. All right. So, but there are objects that do not have LODs. All right. Mostly it's your deco objects, small things that you would not expect to be rendered from a distance. All right. But that definitely does have an LOD. So just in case that confused you or maybe upset you, you're like, Bauer, you are just so stupid. You're very wrong. That's my correction, right? So that does have an LOD. Okay, so what is culling, all right? And how do we use this when we make our maps? All right, so I'm just going to read it. I'm going to read what I have on a screen here. Culling is a process of selectively rendering or excluding objects or portions of a scene that are not visible to the player. It is a technique game developers use to optimize performance by reducing the number of objects or polygons that need to be rendered, improving the overall efficiency of the game. The primary purpose of culling is to eliminate unnecessary rendering and computation, which can consume valuable processing power and memory resources by removing objects or portions of a scene outside of the player's field of view or occluded by other objects. Culling allows game developers to focus their resources on rendering the elements visible to the player, resulting in smoother gameplay and better frame rates. All right, so there are various types of culling that you're going to come across, but let's back up and kind of break down that whole mishmash of whatever I just spewed out there. All right, so what they're trying to say here, we've come across culling. All right, so our LODs, which I had just mentioned, is a form of culling. All right, so it's basically selecting what to render and what not to render. All right, and it helps save on resources, right? It helps the game move along fluidly, no jumps, no glitches, you get a good frame rate, that type of thing. All right. And I'll explain how these different types of culling work. Right. So there's roughly 4 types I'm going to go over that you're bound to come across at some point or another. Let's see. How do I want to explain this? All right. Well, like I said, though, culling, if you can think of what would be a good example here? Like I said, LODs is one example. All right. Like when we back up far enough, what is that shadow? My Lord, it is killing me. I can't figure out what's going on there. But like I said, the LOD, when you back out to a certain point, right, that LOD distance comes into effect and it starts rendering a low poly version of whatever that object happens to be, right? So that's selectively, it's selecting which objects it's going to render, right? So basically it's putting one into the scene, but it's also taking one out of the scene. It's taking out the high poly and putting in the low poly. All right. So there's other versions of this. All right. Now, the first one I'm going to go over is something called view frustum culling. All right. So I'm going to read this from the screen and you can kind of follow along. All right, so view frustum culling. This technique involves determining if an object or a portion of a scene lies within the player's viewing frustum, the portion of the game world visible on the screen. Objects outside the frustum are called and not rendered. All right, so we are going to make a little circle down here. Ooh, pink. That would be our player. All right, so this is me. I need a hat though. There we go. All right, so that is the player, or me, or you. All right, and this here is our field of view. Okay, so this is what we're considering a frustum. All right, so as you're standing here, out in the world or in your map, this is your field of view from here to here. This is what you can see. So everything in this portion right here, this is your frustum. Okay, so that's basically what you can see. So this over here is not going to be rendered. This over here, there's no point in rendering these objects because they fall outside your field of view. All right. So the only purpose they would serve at that point is to suck up, system resources. You're rendering them. You're having to, compute, whatever it computes. There's a lot of computations going on for things that are not rendering that you can't even see. So there's no point of any of these objects, trees, anything like that, of rendering them because you cannot see them. The only thing within your field of view is what's actually being rendered. All right, so that was view frustum culling. Now let me see if I can get rid of this stuff here. Try that. Nope. Try that. Aha, that one worked. All right, so the second one is called occlusion culling. All right, and I'm going to read it. Occlusion culling is used to identify objects or portions of a scene that are entirely hidden or occluded by other objects, such as walls or buildings. These hidden objects are not rendered, saving computational resources. All right, so simply put, if we have, oops, I am still on a pencil. How do I get myself out of there? If we have two different objects here, right? So we have this house here that we're looking at right here. Okay. And once I move down so low like this, the house that you see behind it, right there, is no longer being rendered. It was once back there. If I peek up, I can see it. There it is. But as I get down low enough, bam, it's not being rendered anymore. And why is it not being rendered? Because you can't see it. It's outside your field of view. Now I do see an antenna sticking up there, so maybe, perhaps, if that's attached to the other house, and it's not. All right, so that house right now is not being rendered. Okay, so let me see if I can give you a better example of this, and you've probably come across this at one point or another. Look around. Let me be in here. Maybe there's one in here. So we're going to click on this building here. All right, let me drill through because I'm sure they have what I'm looking for. Okay, right here now. So I'm sure you've seen this in some of the models that you've come across, an occluder mesh. Okay, so if we know that occlusion culling, it's like I said, it's using that to identify objects or portions of a scene that are hidden. All right, so if a building or a barrel or a tractor or something like that is behind a building and you can't see it, it's selectively not going to render those objects to help save resources. Okay, so what you see here inside this building here, this occluder mesh, now keep an eye on these trees in the background. All right, I'm going to lift this up and just keep an eye on those trees. So as this comes up, okay, you see what's going on there now? It's not working as good as I would like it to. If I back up a little bit or change my angle here, there we go. You can see what's happening now, right? So you get what's happening there. So as it comes up and down, things are appearing, disappearing, okay? And this mesh here is what they're using for that occlusion, all right? And it's an occluder mesh. Makes sense, right? They sound the same, so you can kind of put the pieces together on that one and figure out what that mesh is doing. All right. So if you're going to build your own objects, right? So if you're going to make a placeable or a prefab or something like that, all right, you're going to need these elements. You're going to need LODs. You want to include your LODs, most certainly. And the best way to do that, the same with the occluder mesh, you're going to want to include one of those. is to basically look at something else in the game. So if you had made this mesh, right, and it's just an invisible mesh, basically, it's not rendered. What you want to do is you want to set it up just to shape your building, and it needs to be very, very simple mesh, right? Not with all of the detail of your original model or anything like that. Just very, very simple, right? As simple as you can get it. But it needs to hold the shape of the model, right? So this way it can hide the elements that are behind it. Now, when you highlight this occluder mesh, right? And this is my advice, the way that I think would be the best way to go about it is to find another occluder mesh somewhere in your scene graph, right? Somewhere in the map. And just go over and look at everything, right? So start at the top, work your way down, copy the clipping distance if you want to do that, right? Anything that's highlighted, visibility, check on that, right? So LOD, rigid body, and joint are not checked, so uncheck yours. All right, head on over to shape. Now here's something very important down here. Make sure this occluder mesh down here is highlighted or is checked. Just basically, if they have it checked, you check it, okay? And if they have anything for like the object mask or anything like, now here they don't, that's a nav mesh anyhow, but you get the idea, right? So you get what I'm trying to tell you. And you set yours up exactly the way they set theirs up, right? It's not difficult. Just, make your mesh, bring it into the scene, and then go find another occluder mesh in your scene graph and just look through them. If they check it, you check it. If they don't have it checked, you don't have it checked. All right, but you do need to pay attention, like I said, like this object mask here, because depending on what you're working on now for the occluder mesh, looks like it's just a 0. But some objects, depending on what you're working on, or if it's an LOD or whatever, may have something in this object mask. So you want to make sure you copy those numbers over too. Okay, and it's easy as that for setting it up. And how did my stuff come back on here? I want that.
Be gone.
All right, get my best self back on here. Okay, so the next one I have, you should be very familiar with already, right? I'll read it. It's called level of detail culling. All right, so LOD culling is employed to switch between different levels of detail for objects based on their distance from the player. Objects far away from the player are rendered with lower detail models, reducing the number of polygons rendered and improving performance. I think this one needs no explanation at this point. All right, so we did do this in a previous video, LODs, level of detail. And very quickly, if you're just joining us and you have not seen that video, I suggest, well, I don't suggest, but it would be a good idea for you to go to watch that video because it breaks down what LODs are, how they work, gives you the full explanation. But in a nutshell, it's kind of it's a duplicate mesh of your building, right? So you pick one of these buildings. Oh, I don't know, any one, this farmhouse here. Okay, it does have a separate mesh broken down into what's called an LOD. So you can see an LOD 0, LOD 1. Now there is a distance to this LOD. And as I back out far enough, what will happen is it will switch from a high poly model to a low poly model, right? So when the camera is far enough away from that object, you're not viewing it in high res, high poly. It's a low poly. So it's selectively rendering different objects within the scene, right? Putting some in, taking some out, lowering computational resources, and again, lowering the polygon count. So basically, it's just saving your scene, right? It's helping things along by keeping the poly count low and not having to render items unnecessarily. Okay, so that was number 3. Number 4 is something called backface culling. All right. Now this one's kind of a longer, it's a longer explanation, but I'll still go over it. All right. So this technique involves discarding the faces of an object that are facing away from the player. All right. So we're talking about the mesh here. Okay. So since these faces are not visible, they need no rendering, leading to performance improvements. Culling is essential in game development as it helps to ensure the game runs smoothly on various hardware configurations and platforms. Reducing the computational load allows developers to allocate resources more efficiently, resulting in better performance and more immersive player experience. Additionally, Culling enables rendering more visually complex and detailed scenes without sacrificing performance, allowing for more prosperous and realistic game worlds. Overall, culling is a vital optimization technique in game development that significantly contributes to the game's overall performance and visual quality, making it an indispensable tool for game developers to create immersive and enjoyable gaming experiences. Did you get all that? Ay, ay, ay. All right, so if you've been following my Blender series, right, I explained in there, I don't have my Blender open right now, but in there, only one side of the face. When you're working on your mesh, only one side of your face is visible in-game, all right? And that's because of backface culling. If you were to have your mesh inside out or look at it from the opposite side, it would be invisible, right? So if we take this mesh here for this BGA, from the outside, everything looks good. But if we were to step inside and look at the back side of that mesh, the back face, right? It's invisible, okay? And there's a reason for that, because you can only see one side of the face at a time, right? So if you're looking at it from this side, well, it's pointless to render the other side because you can't see it, right? Now, this is not an object that you would go inside of to begin with, right? So it's not that type of object. It's not a building like that. So it's never going to render the inside. So that's a perfect candidate for backface culling, right? Because you can only view one side of the object. Oh my Lord, I need to figure out what is going on with that shadow. I don't know what I did. I'm definitely not going to save this map though, because I have a feeling I know what it is. I'm just not exactly sure how it happened. But it's driving me bonkers, I can tell you that. All right, so does that make sense now with the backface culling? You should be semi-familiar with that if you've been dabbling with Blender and making your own models, right? So only one side of the face will be rendered. The opposite side will basically be invisible. It's removed from the scene to save on resources. Okay, so I figured I would throw this video together for you guys today because we've been going over clipping distance and LODs and stuff like that, because it all falls under the same umbrella, right? It's culling, right? It's I call it resource culling, but people have they describe it different ways. But in a nutshell, it's selectively either putting objects in or usually it's taking objects out. It's just keeping objects out of the scene that don't need to be there, for whatever reason. If it's hidden behind another building, if it's outside your field of view, or like I said, backface culling, if you have no need to have it rendered because, like I was inside that BGA. So things like that, right? LODs, if you're too far away from the object, it's going to give you a low res version until you move far enough away where the clipping distance just kind of, there it goes, right? So that is culling, all right? And the whole point, again, is just to save on resources. So if you're making your own models, I'll go over this, just, repeat it once again. So if you're making your own models, make sure you follow along and you include these things. Find another game object, right? So if you're making a house or a barn or a deco object, go find another base game deco object and break it down. See how they have it set up, right? Set up your LODs the same way that they have their LODs set up. If they have an occluder mesh and you want one, if you're making any type of resource for the game, like houses, prefabs, you definitely want to have an LOD 0 and 1, and you want to have an occluder mesh, right? So those two basic things you definitely want to have included. Now, I've been lazy in the past. Like, actually, most of what you see in my city right now is missing one or two, or maybe even all three of those objects, only because I'm not going to leave it that way. I will get back to them and get them finished up because I'm just being lazy and I wanted to get it into the scene and just keep moving forward. So I do have a lot of work to do. I have to go back and finish all these things up, but make sure like I said, your objects include those elements, your occluder mesh and your LODs, and you properly set your clipping distance, and you'll be good to go. Right. So your players will be happy. Your map will run smoothly, and it will be a good all around, playing experience for everybody. Right. You included. Everybody will be happy. Okay. So that was basically what I had to say about culling. Hopefully it makes sense. If you have any questions, make sure you hit me up in the comment section. I'll try to answer them if I can. And that is it. Like I said, if you find these videos helpful in any way, shape, or form, just give me a like, thumbs up, that kind of thing. Subscribe, whatever. Anyhow, I'm going to leave it right there. With that being said, I am Bauer Brown, and I will see you on the next one.